When you first start editing things like master pages in a publishing site, the process for making any change can often seem heavy-handed. To edit a file, you're often asked to check it out. You then can make a simple change, but after you save the change, you have to check it in. You have to decide if it's a draft or a published version. You may even have to go through approval just to get it up there and working. And in the early stages of a design, when you're making 30 changes an hour to your CSS files and master pages, this all seems way too much. But know that we can change this behavior, but there isn't just one place, just one security page where you change it. Because this idea of check-in or check-out, of versioning, of approval, can be different for different assets in your site. And it's all based on the libraries that your different assets are contained in. In any typical SharePoint custom design, you really have three primary categories of stuff that you're changing. You've got your master pages and your page layouts. Now, these are actually contained in the same SharePoint library, even if it doesn't look like it here. You have your CSS files or any images and supporting files, things like JavaScript. The best idea here would be that you'd keep them together in your style library, which you can get to in SharePoint Designer through the All Files entry in the navigation. And then you have your pages themselves. On a publishing site, these are usually contained in your pages library, although you may make more libraries as you go. The thing is, each of these libraries can have different settings, and it's the settings of the library that drive the behavior that you see with check-in and check-out and content approval and publishing. Now, you can get to the information about these libraries a couple of different ways, but there's one easy way just to jump between them and see all of them in the same place and compare and contrast them. I'm going to go to the home page of my publishing portal here. I'm going to come down into Site Actions and select the Manage Content and Structure option, because this is going to give me one of the easiest ways to actually see most of my containers, most of my libraries in one place. So here I've got my master page gallery, and this is the library that contains my master pages and my page layouts. Then I've got my pages library that contains the web pages themselves. And then I have my style library that contains my CSS, my supporting images or style sheets, anything that I want here. And all of these locations have different settings available to them. So let's drill into one and take a look. I'm going to see my master page gallery here. I'm going to click the drop-down box and come down and edit properties. And this takes me to a conventional document library settings page in SharePoint. So no matter what SharePoint call them, they're calling this the master page gallery. It's really just a document library. And all document libraries have their own set of settings. There's actually several of them. The one we're interested in here is the second link, which is versioning settings. It's what you'll find here that drives the behavior that we see often in the browser and in SharePoint Designer. Clicking that takes me to 4 different options. And I'm actually here going to go from the bottom up. So coming all the way down, here's our first choice. Do we require documents to be checked out before they can be edited? Yes or no? And in this case, it's turned on with yes. The effect that this has is that in SharePoint Designer, if I'm in my master pages or page layout section, and I say, for example, I want to edit v4.master, I can edit it without saying, yes, I want to check it out. This is where it's enforced, is by this setting in the library. Then I'm going to go up 2 sections to the document version history, which is asking, when you make changes, are we making versions of this document? My choices are no versioning, or just major versions, or major and minor versions. The idea of minor versioning in SharePoint is that a minor version is considered a draft version, a work in progress. And it means that any change you make is considered a draft version unless you publish it as a major version. Now, this has absolutely no impact on the amount of space that these versions take up or anything like that. The real impact is actually a knock-on effect. It's this lower section here, that if we do have draft versions available, meaning minor versions, it's asking who can see draft items. Is it any user who can read these items, or only users who can edit items? And the end result of this is I may make a change to a master page file, even check it back in. But if I've checked it back in as a minor version, the only people who can see my changes are the people who can actually edit the master pages in that library. Now, this is often exactly what you want. It allows you to work on this in the background, making a whole bunch of changes. You and anybody else who can edit these can all see them, but anyone who just has read access will see the last published version. And finally, up at the very top here, we have this option. Do you require content approval for submitted items? This is what required me to have to go through that whole approval process for that new starter master page. And it actually would have to happen again every single time I decided to make a major version of that master page. And it's all of these settings that drive the behavior that we see in SharePoint and in SharePoint Designer. Now, if you've worked with SharePoint for any length of time, you may be looking at these settings and saying, well, hang on a second, these are just classic SharePoint settings. They're the settings that all document libraries in SharePoint have had for years. And that's absolutely true. You see, the publishing feature is not bringing anything new to the table. It's just using standard SharePoint functionality. It just feels a little different when you're working with web pages and master pages and CSS files than when you're working with, say, Word documents. But I'm going to go back to my Site Actions menu, come down to my Manage Content and Structure, and this time look at the settings for the style library. Again, this page looks exactly the same. That's because each library has its own set of settings. I click on this one and we can see that, for example, we do not require content approval for submitted items. We are creating major and minor draft versions, and we do require documents to be checked out before they can be edited. But the end result of these settings mean that if I made a change to a CSS file and then published it, saved it as a major version, I don't have to go through an approval process. That published version will instantly take effect for everyone who can edit this site and everyone who can view it. So in the early days, you may find that it's worthwhile to change some of the settings of, say, your master page gallery, just to make it a little more casual when you're first creating those initial master pages and making those changes. But you have complete freedom over what amount of workflow and what amount of control you're actually going to impact on every single piece of your site.